especially if Weyman speaks
slowly. Yeah, I'll speak very slowly. Yeah, I'm very. I want to say, Gadao, Vene, Solidarity. I hope I pronounced that right. It's supposed to be. I'm sorry, I'm a child of imperialism. I don't speak any other. I'm a monoglot. I should speak more languages, but I'm not very good at European languages. And I'm very glad to be here. I think what's happening now, we are at a very serious moment in the historical development against the fight against racism and fascism. I think what's happening in Denmark is often referred to, what happens in Sweden, Denmark and various other countries is presented as an alternative to fighting racism and fascism. So what happens here and the resistance. And I want to say what Ole said earlier on from the trade union movement is very important. That what has happened is that the fascists who were outside the city, outside the parliament, outside a cordon sanitaire have moved much more into the centre of what's taken place in politics, not just in Denmark, Sweden, but in Britain as well. People that were from the far right were excluded post-war, but they are now part of the debate. And I think we have to understand what we're dealing with and the different ways that they appear. Since the 1930s, in Britain, I have to talk about, I think your enemy is at home. It's easy to talk about internationally, but you have to talk about how you've resisted and what's worked and what hasn't worked. And we have to talk about the problems that we face, because I think by untangling them and doing it as a network internationally, it's very important. In the UK last June, there was a fascist demonstration or kind of supports Tommy Robinson demonstration of 15,000 people. There were plenty of Danish flags in that demonstration. There were Swedish flags. There was an international gathering of different people that came together. And to be honest, our lesson is that we have to work internationally because our enemy is prepared to work internationally, and it's a necessity. We've faced different movements in Stand Up to Racism. At the moment, we face a question of Brexit. 17 million people voted to leave. Some people voted to remain. Our position is leave or remain, keep racism out of the debate that's taken place. And the reason why we have that is because the complexities of part of the reason why people voted to leave, some people voted to leave because they want to bring back the British Empire. But they forgot to tell the rest of the world that doesn't want the British Empire that that's what's needed, yeah? And they think if they stand on a table and shout very loud in English, yeah, the rest of the world will understand and do as they're told, right? Now, that's not going to happen, and I'm not going to worry about defending that position, because that's a position of delusion that's held by some people that are who are British. But some people voted because they wanted to give the establishment a kick, because they feel like they're completely isolated. So it's a very complex situation. So you can't simply, some people said anybody who voted leave is a racist. And what we've said is we don't want to do that, because if there's 17 million organised racists inside Britain, we've got a big problem, right? The truth of it is the hard right fascists are not as big as that. The hard right are actually a minority, and we've worked very hard to keep them a minority. And that's what that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to stop the growth of a far right movement. Now, the legitimisation of racism actually has come from the top. There was the Prime Minister called Theresa May. She sent vans into multiracial cities saying, go home. Now, most of us were at work, so the idea we would go home, we're back to Walthamstow. The go home vans were a little dog whistle, really, to racist arguments, which legitimised harder far right groups. If you look at people like Boris Johnson and people like, they've gone even further. They've written things like Muslim women look like letterboxes or bank robbers. This is not coming from the far right. Now, he's one of the worst dressed men in history, right? The idea that he wants to comment on how women dressed, right? Have a good look in the mirror before he talks about anything. But we all know the reason why he's using that is because with populist movements, it's possible to win votes that way. And this is going to be the feature. What Trump did, Trumpism, has come as a political strategy from part of the far right. Ole referred to it. It's not true that the far right are just getting into government on their own. Part of the reason why they're getting into government is because, take Sebastian Kurz inside Austria. he formed a coalition with the Freedom Party. That's something that wouldn't have happened 10 or 15 years ago. And so what we're talking about is how do we deal with the modern situation that we're in. Firstly, the people that are running our society are in a terrible mess. I'll give an example. When I went to university, a long time ago, I got a grant, I got money, and I got a house, all right? Today, that doesn't happen to young people. They're denied that. So how do you explain why people aren't getting it? It's very simple. The foreigner got it. Do you know what I mean? That's what's happened. And there's a debate that's taken place like that. But we have to be very clear. There's a difference between racism and fascism. And there's a difference between racist populist. And getting our themes wrong, it's not about an academic exercise. It matters because of what we face. We know that there are agents that go around, that part of the far right are terrorists. We've had mosques attacked. We've had people murdered. In fact, a British MP was murdered on the streets of the UK, Joe Cox, by a far-right activist. It's not an academic exercise. Isolating these people and stopping the Christchurches, we can do that because a lot of these people feel motivated if they feel they have a bigger audience. So one of the things we have to do is to make sure that they feel isolated. It matters that the streets don't belong to them, but it also matters that we bring the mass of the movement out. In our movement, there's always an argument about confrontation, how you confront people. And I want to be very, very clear. I'm against the fascists having domination of the streets. Hitler came to power by having two wings, an electoral wing and a street army. And they put the two things together. And without the two things, they can't really do that. Fascism is not the same as just a far-right, horrible set of groups. It completely annihilates any political situation, any political government. The March on Rome by Mussolini destroyed all democratic organisation. When Hitler came to power, he destroyed everything. And our job is to make sure that the street movement and the electoral movement do never fuse to become big enough to destroy all forms of what I describe as liberal democracy. That's not an accident that can't be stopped. I think that Golden Dawn could have been the natural successor to what happened inside Greece. Syriza fails, left-wing government fails, they could have stepped up and been there, they're not there. In the UK, the British National Party, all these people could have become much bigger and much more central to what happened. We were able to stop them. And I think what happens internationally matters on that. The Brexit crisis is particularly important because I think that the first thing we have to understand is the impact of the people at the top of society. Donald Trump, and the way he's put it. But we also have to understand there's resistance against him. The biggest mobilisations called by much of the women's movement are given against Trump internationally. So there's an enormous movement that could potentially be built. The problems we face, as I said before, is how do you put together this movement? And I think the anti-racist movement is a particular problem. None of the people who are part of the anti-racist movement agree on anything. Right? What we have to do is make sure they agree on the one thing, they stop the far right and they stop racism. What do I mean by that? Our organisation has a chair that's Muslim, has a chair that's Jewish. When they discuss the Middle East, they don't agree. Yeah? What they agree on is to come out on the same demonstration at the same time. We have Turkish organisations and we have Kurdish organisations inside our. They don't agree on Erdogan and wherever it is, but they do agree that when the far right come out, we have to come out together. And pulling together such an organisation, we have the leaders of the social democratic parties and we have autonomous groups who believe in dressing in black, being really tough, and saying we have to do them. They're all in the same organisation at certain points and agree on singular issues. Bringing that all together has been the key, I think, of making a difference. But ideologically, we have to understand the impact of people like Steve Bannon, when Trump talks about a Muslim ban, when he talks about the border wall, means that in the old days, to be honest, you knew who the fascists were. They had skinheads, they wore swastikas, they behaved in that way, and you could say, when you said, are you a Nazi? They said, yes, I am. I am a Nazi, and I think Hitler is misunderstood. Mussolini, he didn't understand the trains ran on time. Yeah? They made up all kinds of lies. Today, if you ask a Nazi, are you a Nazi? They say, I'm alt-right. They say, I'm an ultra-patriot. Right? They lie. They lie. And actually, one of the problems is hard Nazis, actually, Generation Identity, are getting onto mainstream television. We have people that consider themselves to be intellectuals debating with them. Yes, you think that Europe has been taken over by George Soros in alliance with Muslims, and they have a secret plan to plot to take and change Europe into a different type of society. Let's discuss this, yeah? Normally what would happen is you get that person some help, right? You say, come this way. Can I ring a family member? Right? Yeah, I'd give you a special support, yeah? You wouldn't put them on and have a serious debate with them. You'd say, look, you need help, right? What's happening? Can I help you? Can I buy you a drink? Or maybe not, but you do something about it. The problem is, the serious thing, ideological thing, in the serious newspapers, they're being treated seriously. They've been treated as it's a freedom of expression. See, somebody says, I'd like to discuss your existence. Yeah? Can I discuss how long you've got to, I'd like to discuss how long you've got to live. You wouldn't discuss it. You say, you're threatening me. I don't want to discuss the threat, yeah? I need help. I'd get the solidarity of everybody else and say, you've got to leave. And actually, what we've seen across Europe is they use different tactics. Inside parts of Eastern Europe, they use the Roma, or they attack LGBT plus rights, or they attack women. And you've had illiberal governments like Viktor Orban, who's treated as, in other words, normalising it on an enormous scale. Now, I'm not being pessimistic about it. What I'm saying to you is it needs to be exposed. George Soros is an anti-Semite, is the leading anti-Semite in Europe, as far as I can see. He's not exposed as that. He's treated as a normal part of the discourse. We need to expose those people. At the moment, if you look at the recent Austrian elections, the Freedom Party dropped by 9%, following the scandal around Heinz Christian Strache. Now that's good. Every time I see a Nazi crying on TV, I'm very happy, right? Cry more, right? Lose everything, good. But the one thing I'd like to say, most parties, if they presented themselves as patriotic parties and they had a deal with another country in order to sell their country for money, what would happen to that party? That party technically should disappear if it's based on that. Their vote went down, not disappearing. And what we have to understand, why are they being kept afloat, is because the level of Islamophobia, the level of racism, and the level of state racism. Some people say it doesn't matter the difference between state racism, racist populist organisations. And what do I define as a racist populist organisation? I mean, like, part of the Brexit, somebody like Nigel Farage is a racist populist, right? The former UKIP, there's an organisation called UKIP. UKIP used to be, I just want to stand in elections and I don't like foreigners. Right? That's what they stood for. They're not the same as the Nazis. I don't like foreigners and I'd like to kill you. Right? People say they're the same. Just call everything fascist, yeah? Trump's a fascist. Everything's a fascist. You can't do that. If somebody says you've got a cold or you've got cancer and the doctor came to you and said, what have I got, a cold or cancer? They're all the same. It doesn't really matter. I'll give you treatment. Here, take some more vitamin C. That's not good enough, yeah? You have to know your enemy. By knowing your enemy, it arms you and it shows you how to get the alliances together. And what we've had is there's another element to the far right, is the street armies, the Pegidas, the people that take to the streets and try... In Britain, there was something called the Democratic Football Lads Alliance. Now, I'll give you a little bit of warning. Anytime you hear the word freedom, or democratic, or anything like that, or rights, or anything like that, alarm bells should start ringing in your head, right? The fact you have to describe yourself as what you're not, yeah, tells you that they're not what they are. The Democratic Freedom came out of something called the English Defence League, which was a football hooligan group. And we shouldn't underestimate the size of this, because they can actually, culture plays a big part of it. They go into football matches, mass movements, they try and have an impact. It's possible to break these things up. It's possible. We leafleted the football grounds. We had people playing music in between. It's not true that only the hard stuff works, confronting. You also have to win hearts and minds. We got people that were very popular going in and saying, I don't like the Democratic Football Lads. They're not part of my team. Doesn't sound like much. We welcome Muslims to come and play. Why can't we worship, when Eid is taking place, we link the clubs to mosques to say the nearest mosque. You do things culturally as well. There was big resistance against this from some of the top clubs. They said, why are we this is politics, they said. while all of them belong to the Tory party and various other things. That's politics, that's football. We had to make sure that we challenge. It's not always the hard thing. Also, in terms of confrontation, by the way, there's an organisation called the British National Party, and it had a red, white, and they were linked to the Front National in France. They had a red, white and blue festival. And when they had this festival, we needed to break up the festival. If the festival took place, 2,000 ordinary people went to it, and then they would be able to get another 4,000, then they get 8,000, they grow. So we went to the where the camp was, and we blocked the roads. We didn't fight, we just sat down in the middle of the road and said, this is wrong. All the cars backed up for miles, the camp didn't take place. Inside, what the people said, they were going to smash up a mosque inside Walthamstow, right? And the Nazis were going to march. We had a demonstration. We sat down in the road where they're supposed to go. All the people, different groups of people sat down. The trade unions sat down. It wasn't necessary. The police came to us and said the fascists would like to march to the mosque. They would like to march there, and would you facilitate that, Mr. Bennett? No, we think they're going to attack people. Tell them to go somewhere else, yeah? They said, we insist on it. Then the police went to them and said, there's too many people in your way, you can't get there. Right? So then they went round the back way, and then all these children threw sweets at them. Feeding around our area, because they're all mixed, they all come together. So then a huge fascist was suddenly confronted by children shouting and screaming at them. That's the picture that got taken, yeah? Then they couldn't get out of where they were because there's too many people. So one of the biggest fascists wet himself, yeah? Another picture was taken, right? That's what went out about the demonstration. Then when you looked on the social media, all the Nazis were complaining, we're supposed to be the master race. We didn't feel very masterly, right? You had different tactics play off in different ways. And you have to, depending on what you're faced with, you have to do it. Some people stand in elections, you have to leaflet outside the schools. You have to wear badges. You have to use different tactics according to what you're faced with. I'm not saying that's easy and that works everywhere. The hardest thing is to get unity. The hardest thing is to get unity. And what I mean by be patient about unity. Be patient about the fact that people don't feel like they necessarily will work together. And I'll give you an example about this. We had a big argument about religion in our group because a lot of people are atheists. They don't believe in God. But we had to bring atheists and people that do believe in God together to oppose the fascist. And we had to explain why. People said to me, I'm a strident non-believer, it restricts my rights. And we said, you can have your rights not to believe in God, and they have the rights to believe in God. And the two movements have to come together because, after all, we believe in all those rights. The leadership of the movement has to put together the people they can convince to do that. I think that the way that Kiev is a very good example for us. Golden Dawn, you know, it was getting up to 26% of the vote. They were outside. I mean, the devastation of the Greek economy shows they should win. You know that people say if there's an economic crisis, the left don't always win, then the far right will automatically get in. They haven't got in. Their organisation has been broken up. But how was that done? I mean, I think that it was done. I think we have to learn the lessons of Pavlos Fias was murdered by the fascist. It was made a criminal organisation. These organisations, in order to hold together their cadre, have to carry out violent acts. And when they carry out violent acts, it's very important we label them. I mean, I know the sister from, Breivik will talk about this, but they're always lone wolves, aren't they? They're always somebody suffering from mental illness as an individual. They're not connected to anything. The Christchurch person, we have to make the connections and make them explicit and have solidarity with the communities that are attacked. But I'll stick to my points about the four different groups. The hard Nazis, the Euro-fascist, the people that hide who they are but want to get into power, but the basis of their organisation is based on that. The groups that come out onto the streets, the street armies, and all these things can interplay between each other. And finally, state racism. I think if we understand how all of these things work together, we can talk about them. But one of the biggest glues is the question of Islamophobia. And I want to say this is very important. I think Islamophobia is an older form. Islamophobia is a newer form of racism. But the higher Islamophobia has grown, the more it's opened up the door to the older racisms, I think. And then they interplay back onto what's happening. I want to say that the method that we used to push back the fascists in last year the street armies were really confident. They were going everywhere. For the first demonstration we called, it's not true, even though everybody reviled them, 400 people turned up. It wasn't true that everybody turned up. In fact, we were a minority, and anybody on that demonstration, I just wanted to go home. Do you know what I mean? I was on the demonstration, there's 15,000 people in front of you, and they all seem to know my name. I said, it's time to go home. How do I get out of here? I remember, people say, I oppose the police. I said to the police, stay where you are. There's the police said, we want to go. I said, you've got to stay where you are. Right? You have to stay. I said, there's number 10. You've got to defend it. They said, we don't have the human power to stop them. Normally they don't say that. If it was a workers' demonstration or a women's demonstration, whatever it is, there's no argument about using power. Right? They just use it. This time they didn't. They said, we're not sure about what to do. It took us months to put together the coalition for that particular movement, but it did work. And I think that we have to build a movement like that. I think we got the trade unions, the TUC. We built a petition that thousands of people signed. We put it in the national media. We went to schools. We went to hospitals. We tried to change the atmosphere around this, and I think that's what we've got to do. I think that one of the things that which I think is very important, is that after Christchurch, there were mass demonstrations or little demonstrations everywhere. We have to pull together these different networks in order to protect us from the future, from the growth of the far right. Because I've got to. What I suggest as a strategy is that if somebody's an open Nazi, you label them as that. Tommy Robinson, who's well known internationally, we labelled him as a Nazi. He stood inside the Northwest to become an MEP. It's not true that he couldn't become an MEP. There's a man called Nick Griffin who represented that seat, and if all the people that voted for the BNP voted for Tommy Robinson, he would have been the MEP. In fact, he got 2%, right? We called him 2% Tommy. And he went out the back door instead of coming out the front door because he was outvoted and broken because of that strategy pulled together all different elements of society. What's important is they also involve the people at the top and the people at the bottom, involved everybody together in order to do that. And I think that's important that was being. What's also happened was that we found, UKIP moved from being racist populist to being much harder far right. These organisations don't always stay the same. They morph. And actually, when you talk about their so-called radical right, whatever it is, sometimes they have all the same elements of it. Look at the AfD inside Germany. When the AfD won its first seat, the leader of the AfD felt she wasn't safe enough to sit in the same room as the rest of the Nazis that were in there, who weren't Nazis. In other words, it had two wings in the same party. It had racist populist and it had hard Nazis. And I think we're going to experience much more of this as the movement. And the organisations like UKIP started supporting Tommy Robinson and making much more Nazi sounds. So UKIP moved away from just being where racist populists and we support Nigel Farage into being a much harder organisation and going out onto the streets. So we should expect some more of this. So I want to argue that I think that we have to be confident that the history won't repeat itself. There's nothing inevitable about a far right or fascist takeover, providing we organise special organisations to stop that. Those are united fronts. Those are different political organisations and cultural organisations that come together. Now, I recognise how hard that is. You called a demonstration, you said, and a small number of people turned up. But what you have to understand is, if you put the right ingredients together, you get a good cake. You want a bigger cake, but you have to put the right ingredients together. But you have to start by doing that. And that's what you did. Stand Up to Racism is not the national body with just the people at the top. It matters what each individual group does, build on the ground. And actually some of our battles have taken a place in Wales, in places where there are small cities, where there isn't lots of people, where people have had to come together to put them together. And I think that's what we can do. But I also think we have to dream big. When we did the UN Anti-Racism Day and we brought 60 countries together, it matters, and I'll tell you why I think it matters right now. I think it matters because there are so many racist populists in power out in government. You cannot have Bolsonaro, you cannot have Salvini, you cannot have the growth of the National Rally, you cannot have the growth of all these far-right groups internationally. You cannot have rallies like what took place in Milan and not have a situation where you say, challenge their main arguments. Refugees are welcome. There shouldn't be a fortress Europe. The reason why economies are going down is not because the arrival of refugees on the country. Steel plants are not closing because a refugee was spotted arriving in a boat somewhere. Whatever that's who shut the plant, yeah? That's not who shut. Car production is not falling because there's been, they say immigration has closed the plant. So why did plants expand in a period of higher immigration and decline later on? Oh, I don't know the explanation, but a foreigner must be behind that as well, right? We have to put forward systematic, careful arguments that explain what is causing the crisis and win people to it. Firstly, the other thing is we also have to be part of those campaigns that make people feel like the people that are seeking asylum are the same as you and me, or we're brothers and sisters. We have to win that. It's not true that that isn't one. Most people who live with people say, I'm worried about somebody from 5,000 miles away coming and taking my job. But when you say, oh, it's the person who lives there, who's been, they say, no, I know that person's a good person, they should stay, right? I'm not talking about that, so they should stay, that's bad, I've met them. The kids play with my kids, yeah, they're fine. We have to build around that at the same time, is to build a welcome atmosphere, which we saw happen with welcome refugees. I think that we live in very dangerous times. I do agree with that. I think our environment's in danger, I think there's economic crisis, I think we have the growth of the far right, but we shouldn't forget one thing. The majority of people actually agree with us. We are not the minority on this question. The fascist and the far right are a minority. And how do we know that? Because every time they get up and speak, even Trump has to get up and say, I'm not a racist. If racism was majority view, he'd get up and say, I'm a racist and I'm proud of it, yeah? He'd say, well, they didn't know. He doesn't. He says, I'm not a racist, but I say racist things and I do racist things, yeah? You are racist, yeah? That's the first thing we have to do. If someone's a Nazi and they do Nazi things, you say, you're a Nazi. We have to name those people out. But we have to remember that we're the majority, and organising the majority and giving them a voice and giving them directions can stop history repeating itself. Never again is not an empty phrase or what we chuck out. It's got to be something that's real and dynamic. And I'm very proud to be here because everywhere I go, there are organisers like you organising. And if we network together and we bring that majority of mood together into a single kind of network around it in which we are the majority, we change what happens. It matters what happens. They have to refer to our counter mobilisations. We have a voice and we can win that deeper and much more successfully, providing we coordinate and understand and never underestimate our enemy and understand our own power. And I'll stop there.
Weyman, would you like to sum up?
I think that was a fantastic discussion, and as in most things, it's about sharing our experiences that comes up with the best way of dealing with the problems that we face. I don't believe there's one country that doesn't face the same problems in different orders and different speeds. So I think we have to share what's going on. Firstly, the question of state racism. It's important that we understand that state racism is embedded there, that came up. And it goes up and down. And also, it's very important to arm people with the question of what happens when a social democrat goes in. To be honest, sometimes in Britain, there's conservatives, and they've always used racism. They've always played certain points, played up that part. But sometimes people are shocked when a social democrat wants to. There used to be a man called Ed Miliband, and he produced a mug. Says tough on immigration controls, which is in our country called muggishness, is stupid. And he produced a mug. It didn't help, yeah, because it just let every other racist put in. But the question is, how do you deal with social democrats that bring racism? It's not the same way as you deal with fascists that bring. It's always important to shoot right. it's always important to say, look, these far-right people are benefiting from what you're doing and actually putting that into practice. That's much harder because you're more angry with somebody who calls your friend and then they go and do the wrong thing. It's very important that we make sure that people understand that. Doesn't mean justifying it, it means understanding it, because when you go to build a united front, often you still have to work with people who you disagree with. The same people that supported the racist mug signed our petition this week about EU citizens. We've got something like 500,000 people sign a thing about EU citizens because they haven't been given any rights. So we've signed in the petition with some of the people who even supported border controls and stuff like that. In fact, people have different... So you have to work with people. That doesn't mean I want to give concession to racism. I mean, you have to work with people that hold those ideas, at the same time build a group of people that oppose those ideas. That's not easy, but that's the only way to do it. You have to build every refugee campaign, everything you can. Obviously, I'm sure you do, but what we've chosen is you choose certain things at certain times to make sure that it's constantly on the agenda. A question was asked about the activist. That EU citizenship isn't done from above. Of course, all the MPs sign it, the trade unions sign it, musicians sign it.
I signed it.
And you signed it, yeah? Everybody signs it. But we also took it to people's workplaces. Their little groups put up the we support EU citizens. Things were done on the ground that networked things. The badges that were taking place, the leaflets that took place. All these things. For us, sometimes people say we use Facebook. We do use Facebook. But we also have meetings where people meet face to face, where groups meet face to face. There was a meeting there was a meeting in Enfield of 200 people who came together, organised by activists, because by getting the activists together and giving people a sense that they can lead, makes the organisation stronger. People asked about the psychologist. We had social workers build a network against racism, and they brought together, and it builds the movement deeper, because the activities matter. So why is that important? Because when there was 2 racist attacks that took place in a mosque, it wasn't reported in the national media. A pregnant woman was attacked by somebody and she lost a baby. She was kicked. Well, they didn't report it, right? It became reported because we made sure it was reported, because a network of people support it. We highlighted every racist attack that took place and said and people were outraged about it, and made sure there was a network about the outrage. I think it's very important that all the networks come together, SOS Racism, and different groups come together. At different times we've faced different things. I'll tell you why it's important. I think particularly in France, where the birthplace of SOS Racism, the actual growth of the Front National or the National Rally is a problem. And part of the reason why it's a problem is because we have to deal with the question of Islamophobia as a central way in which the far right grow. We cannot have a movement that says it's secular, but in reality, it's not really dealing with the... If somebody's a racist and they say attacking someone because they're a Muslim, we have to understand it's not a question of religion. It's a question of racist organising on that. I say that, it's easier said than done in that sense, because we have to be quite sophisticated. We bring together people. There was a prayer meeting in the middle of a demonstration. We said people want to do their prayers, they can do their prayers, yeah? And so and therefore you have to combine the different elements. Actually, to be honest, when we had an attack in East London, the group, the fascists, said they had a pride march onto the mosque. Do you understand? They said, we're marching for pride and would like to march on the mosque. But they're Nazis, they murder. The same people went around, beat up the LGBT community, but they decided this time we're going to march for pride on the mosque. We brought a trans woman into the mosque to speak, and she spoke inside the mosque. Actually, by the way, they wouldn't let her speak at the Catholic Church or at the Christian church, because they said, we'll support what you're doing, but we'd rather not have the speaker, right? But no one reported on that. But I'm just saying that to you, just so you know how complicated and difficult it was, right? So you have to do these complicated, difficult things, but nevertheless, the impact of that was we exposed what the fascists were trying to do. We also got LGBT activists to go onto the demonstration that the Nazis were marching on and say, these people have carried out these attacks. They're linked to that. So you have to use different methods depending upon what you're faced with. And I think the activist base, unity in action is worth a lot more than the philosophical debates about where we stand on something. And I don't mean that doesn't mean you don't need philosophy. Of course you need philosophy. If you don't have philosophy, you can't understand anything. But unity in action, we disagree about all this, where can we come together on something? And putting forward simple ideas matters. People said, is it cool to, you know what, part of the way we try to make anti-racism cool, and I don't know if you can do this here, we went to different groups of people. We went to musicians. I spoke to a man called Ed Sheeran, right, and another guy called Dave, who's a rapper. Two of these people said, would you say why you like each other? Yeah? So we had a video of Ed Sheeran's a big artist, and another person saying, we like each other. He didn't say we're against racism, stuff like that. We like each other. Even when it was trite. I'm ginger, he's black. Things that you just think, oh my God. But nevertheless, they did the video, yeah? The video goes out, goes viral, because it's this person, whatever it is. All the people that like them, it becomes cool. And then you put out, the Nazis don't like this. They don't like this. This is a bad day for you. Look what we got. All the people all these young people like each other, who you don't want to like each other. You're boring, yeah? You can't dance. You can't do poetry. You use anything you can to give that kind of stuff. Because actually, tell you the truth, you go to those people and listen to what they listen to. They listen to actual world music. And you say, why do you listen to that? Oh, I like that. You put it out. Can I have a line from that? Can I have a picture? Can I put it up on social media? You use anything you've got to make sure. And by the way, they are cool. And by therefore, I'm cool. That's how you do it, yeah? You use the things in terms to make sure the thing is exciting. And actually, by and large, you can do that. I also think we have to do manifestations in support of each other. If there's an attack in a country or an attack takes place, we have to go to the other embassy and support the people that are taking place. When the Polish women were attacked by the fascists, because of whatever it is, we went to the Polish embassy and I think we have to do more of that in terms, they were arrested. I think Amnesty took up the case and eventually they were freed, yeah? I think we have to do a lot more of those kind of activities and give each other solidarity of the anti-racism. It doesn't mean to be huge, but it needs to be there. That's what I think is going to be, also, I got our house, you know when the English Defence League, they said, we're going to Denmark, we're welcome in Denmark. And when their beautiful anti-racist demonstration we took the pictures, got all the pictures back, yeah, and said, look what happened there. They don't want you. That English export didn't work, yeah? It's Danish, right? Yeah, Danish. We put that. It matters. It really mattered because when Tommy Robinson came back, he had to say he had a bad day. And we made sure before he arrived, he was told that he had a bad day. So the more we can have international action around things that matters. The other thing is, it doesn't matter if your organisation isn't huge, you have to have an organisation. It doesn't matter if you're not paid by people, you have to have an organisation. Because at some point, people will turn to you. Even, I'm not suggesting there isn't SOS racism, there isn't whatever. I'm talking about our organisation has people in it who I've got anti-racist organisations, but there's one coordination. The fight is for a coordinated organisation where people come together. We don't always agree on what the priorities are, but what we agree on is the 3 priorities we're going to have, and then we go and do it. Other people might go and do other things, but it's worth having that because each time you do that, you build up a level of activists and also you build up recognition. The fascists and the racists say we hate stand up to racism and we cheer. They say every time we go somewhere, there's this banner, stand up to racism. Everywhere we go, everywhere, whatever it is. So you choose whatever that name is and you just popularise it. Do you know what I mean? You probably know this already, but it does matter coming together no matter how small you are. I also agree on looking on the bright side as well as I look on the dark side, yeah? There's a bright side and the dark side, yeah? But come on, the dark is getting, the dark is growing. Do you know what I mean? That is part of the problem. I actually think that we have to understand, and our politicians don't understand because they have to get into Parliament, that's their job. But our single job is to build a united front that thwarts the ability of someone to build an organisation like Hitler. And the two-pronged thing matters. We have to make sure they come. You know, people said about they cannot come on the streets. If they dominate the streets and they build a street army, then they can take power. Marine Le Pen, I think, is one of the biggest dangers to what's taking place now. But I tell you what she hasn't got. She hasn't got a street army. She hasn't got the ability to do that. So she's not got the complete... But every year, on the 1st of May, she marches on the street, and that demonstration is getting bigger and bigger. So what we have to do, I think, is to make sure the two things don't grow. I'm not saying whether there's an answer to it. As an invitation, and I'll end this up with an invitation, we've got a conference in London on the 19th of October, which I'd like to invite people to or join on Skype or whatever it is. And we've also got a kind of meeting afterwards on the Sunday to try and bring together some experiences that have taken place. We want to have that particular mix. And if I've missed out groups or we haven't talked together, whatever it is, that's our fault. But I do believe we have to build that world against racism and that network, because at the end of the day, it is our world. Somebody said, is it their world or whatever it is? I went to a meeting with a man called Nick Griffin, where he said, I'm an MEP and I'm going to be an MP. And I went into the room afterwards and I saw him crying in the corner, whatever it is. I tell you how that was done. That was done by mass mobilisation of people who defeated him from a position. Actually, he potentially could have won, but he was broken because we had the idea of working from below and had an organisation to be able to do it. It's not automatic that they can come to power, and it's not automatic we can stop them, but in between is what we build and do that makes a difference. So thank you very much for, I've really enjoyed the little bit I've been able to do and sharing the information with you, and I think we have to carry on, and I'll stop there. Thank you. So